Hey, y'all, and welcome back to another weekly live cast where we're going to talk about politics, culture, theology, and how these things intersect. I'm your host, MaKendree Vanhall. Sorry for the confusion. I'm going by a chosen name now. I got tired of people calling me Chris when I would introduce myself as Christopher, and I hate repeating myself. So after years and years of doing so, I threw in the towel. It was a losing battle. So MaKendree Vanhall here with you today, and I have a very special guest with me today. Sandhya Jah is in the house. Sandhya, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself, MaKendree?
I can't complain. It never does any good. So,
And I'm
and if I
super
wanted
excited to
to,
be on this episode where you are using your new name because I love it a ton.
oh,
It's a great name.
thank you so much. I've always loved that name. It's great, and it can't be shortened. The only person that I
Exactly.
think, yeah, exactly. You got to kind of follow through. You got to commit to the whole thing. And the only person I think that really doesn't like it, that's not my biggest fan right now, is the barista at Starbucks. Like, I think. I think she really liked writing my name with 5 letters. I think she was a huge fan of that, and she's like, "Oh man,
Absolutely.
I'm not getting paid enough for this." She's like, "Is that with a K, with a C?" Every time I
She's gonna
walk
start
in,
calling you Mac any day
I
now. I'm just warning you in
no,
advance.
no, I'm gonna have to work on that. I'm prepared. I'm prepared. Like, look, I've been kind up to this point, but if I literally go through the process of changing all the names on my social media accounts and handles and everything else, and you still call me an abbreviated name, we're gonna have problems. So,
Absolutely.
and actually, Sandhya, you've got a one of those experiences too. I'm sure because your name. I called you Sandhya for the longest time. I think you corrected me
Yep.
one time, but it was a long time. You were very gracious, and I appreciate that. But I have been calling you the wrong name for like at least 8 months, at
Oh, I'm good
least.
with it.
Well, Shonda, thanks so much for being here. And I, recently participated in this amazing fundraising project with you that was a blast that our church got to be involved in. And some of the folks in our church did get to see that event, and it was amazing. But
Yay.
yeah, it was so much fun. And you did such a wonderful job. And matter of fact, we're going to post the link to that event in this interview today. But some folks may not know you. So I was wondering, can you just kind of give us your backstory that kind of led down the path to everything that is Shonda today?
Absolutely. So my father was from India, uh, Hindu from India. My mother is Scottish, still has the accent, Scottish Presbyterian. I was born in England, but we moved to Akron, Ohio when I was a toddler. So the fact that I grew up in a working in a labor town, and I went to college in a labor town, and I currently live in a labor town, I think has shaped me in a whole bunch of ways, because
Mm-hmm.
my people are working people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
in general in this country, working people are not treated well and are
Mm-hmm.
encouraged not to raise too much of a fuss about that. So
Mm-hmm.
my people are the ones who raise a fuss anyhow. So
Nice.
that's a little bit of my background. I have worked in a lot of random places. I worked in Congress right after college for my representative from Akron, Ohio, and I was actually really proud to work for somebody who
Wow.
was really invested in working people at a time that that was not very popular.
Mm-hmm.
I then worked for an organization called the Interfaith Alliance doing religious liberty work, making sure that religious minorities were prioritized
Mm-hmm.
in the late 90s when the Christian coalition had really reached its zenith. So we had an uphill struggle at that time, and I left there to go to grad school, to go to seminary and policy school around July of 2001. So I left Washington, D.C., and left an organization fighting for religious minorities just before 9/11. Um, Obviously 9/11 was a really formative experience for a lot of South Asians who were
Mm-hmm.
living in this country at the time, and I was among them. Moved to the Bay Area to work for my denomination out here, and ended up falling in love with a tiny little congregation with a very big building, First Christian
Mm-hmm.
Church of Oakland, and
Mm-hmm.
helped them turn that into a nonprofit collective of organizations working to end violence by ending economic injustice, an organization called the Oakland Peace Center. So that's a little bit of my journey. Now I'm
Wow.
doing diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting work and working on my fifth book. So that's maybe the boring CV version of my life, but that's where I am now.
That is a hefty resume. And even in abbreviated form, that's impressive. Like no one can deny that. I'm like, I
Children of immigrants, we are not allowed to do things by halves.
well, you have definitely succeeded in accomplishing, quite a bit of notable work in your life. So hats off. So some of that I didn't even know. I didn't know you worked for Congress. So
I
that's
did.
that's amazing. I'm like, oh yeah, I used to work with cows like a long time ago. I got some great pranks that we did on the local law enforcement that
I love it.
that's
I love it. I think that's
that's
more interesting, honestly.
that another podcast. So Shonda, it feels so good to laugh right now in a
Yeah.
season where nothing was really enjoyable for a lot of folks. And you
Yep.
and I kind of discussed this right before we started recording. And one of the things that's been weighing heavily on your heart is the toll that this season has taken on people that are doing social justice work, perhaps
Yep.
doing ministry and things like that. And I
Yep.
just wanted to talk about your perspectives because I feel like we haven't really processed all the grief and the
Yeah.
stress that we went through as a nation recently. And I think this conversation's important. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on burnout right now?
McKendree, actually, I was listening to a mental health professional about a month ago saying, hey, we think we're coming out of a thing, but the fact that things are opening up means that for the first time in 16 months, we're actually going to have to confront and feel the trauma that
Mm,
we all went through. And so,
mm-hmm,
on the one level, there was the trauma that we all collectively experienced, and then the
mm-hmm,
distinct ways that that impacted communities of color, people who were on the front lines of the workforce,
mm-hmm,
people who were having to navigate all of the pressures around who got vaccinated and who didn't. And then on top of that, Asian American activists, black activists, or activists for black liberation, um, disability justice activists, all of their work had to crank up to a whole other level
mm-hmm,
because of the experience, the public awareness of oppression that was finally being turned to all of those groups.
mm-hmm.
And so those folks, and God bless the pastors who had to learn a completely different way of holding community together, not just pastors, teachers as well, lots of
Yep,
folks, and who are
yep,
now in a season of being told they have to learn yet a third way
yep,
of holding community together, and a community of folks who are not always behaving well
mm-hmm,
because we've been living through collective trauma. There's a statistic out there that 53% in April of U.S. Residents admitted to feeling a sense of burnout or exhaustion. That was up from 40% a year ago. All of
wow,
us are living under capitalism, which means most of us are encouraged to work ourselves to burnout anyhow,
mm-hmm.
or have to, because a lot of us are holding multiple jobs. And so I've been really worried about the well being of the folks who are fighting for good, who had to go through what all of us went through, but also had to take on additional fights at a time that none of us were really doing all that well to begin with.
Gosh, I couldn't have phrased that any more succinctly. Like that was the entirety of what we witnessed. As far as what's going on in the realm of education and social
Yeah.
justice work and ministry. I mean, for me, I feel like I've always embraced the more cutting edge methodology in church
Mhm.
planning.
Mhm.
Uh, And this was a difficult road for me to traverse. With my
Yeah.
entire career, embracing innovation, I still found this to be incredibly difficult because there is no blueprint for what we went through at
Nope.
all.
And we
And
had to do it while we were living through a trauma
yeah,
together.
yeah.
So we were
And
feeling things while we were doing things, right?
yeah, and it was just a nightmare. And so many of my friends in ministry and colleagues that are clergy were just burning out left and right. It was visible, and to an
Yep.
extent, I did as well because there is no church planter training course that you can
No.
go to that could have prepared you for this. They definitely don't cover it in seminary. There's nothing that could have prepared us for
Nope.
what we
That's
encountered.
absolutely right.
And
And I would add to that, I actually know a few folks who were pastoring traditional churches, and they
uh-huh.
have you heard the term purple church?
I have not. I would love to
So
know more though.
a purple church is a church that has both Democrats and Republicans in it.
Oh,
So
I don't have
blue
that.
and red.
I don't
And
have that. I know of these
no,
churches that you speak of. It's definitely not
yes.
mine, but I've heard of
It's
them.
not where I am called to minister, but there's a place for it. And,
Sure.
the only way that that changes can happen is when people are able to love each other across divides and work to come to common consensus. So not the
Mm-hmm.
spaces that pretend everything's fine
Mm-hmm.
because we diminish the well-being of the people who are being oppressed, but
Mm-hmm.
congregations where we can actually have conversations across differences because we
Mm-hmm.
have a shared commitment to a better world.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I know several pastors of purple churches who by July had to quit
Oh no.
because people's bad behavior, people acting out of their worst selves because we were going through this collective trauma, led them to treat their pastors horribly. All of the social covenants that those groups had formed disintegrated. I certainly know a lot of just flat out red churches that had troubles because you had an episode about QAnon, but QAnon supporters began to be angry at their pastors for not lifting up what they experienced to be a truth, a horrifying,
Oh my gosh.
disturbed, malformed truth, but to them
Mm-hmm.
a truth. So I watched a number of communities that had been held together gently and lightly and were experimenting with something that couldn't withstand the pressure. And several of my friends have left ministry
Mm.
because they could no longer tolerate the mistreatment they were dealing with as people lived out their trauma in all of these unhealthy ways.
That is so discouraging.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I did hear of things like that. Not people that were in senior pastor positions,
Yeah.
but people that were on ministry teams still at
Yeah.
churches that are either kind of this neutral ground where they don't discuss politics. So they
Hmm.
attempt to be purple, but not in a way to grow together. Really, just as a way
Right.
to try and appease everybody in order to maintain their numbers. And then there's
Often at
churches
the
that
expense of the people on the margins, right? We
oh,
don't talk about
absolutely.
race and so it's healthy, except that it's not healthy to anybody who's impacted by racism, for example.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And those churches I think can be much more difficult to alter than churches that are just flat out, I mean, at least they warn you about who
Yeah.
they are at the super conservative churches. And even in those
Yep.
churches, I know people that kind of hung around those churches because they grew up in them or their family went there and they wanted to support their family. So they did
Yeah.
not share the ideals of the conservative congregants, but they went anyway. And they even witnessed their churches falling apart from the QAnon
Yeah.
nonsense. And
Yeah.
it's just so discouraging. I mean, even I, from a church planning perspective in a far leftist
Mhm.
world, I dealt with a tremendous amount of stress during this season
Yeah.
because I realized that not only would this impact our congregation in negative ways, that are far too long to mention in one conversation, but it would also mean that our church would never look the same. We were
Yeah.
never going to go back. Watching our reach expand beyond Santa Cruz in our online
Yeah.
platform, I mean,
Yeah.
some people took that as a positive. For me, it's incredibly stressful because, again, I was not prepared for this,
Right.
was not trained for this. None of us were. And
Right.
we've just been kind of shoved into the 21st century, kicking and screaming, under a tremendously stressful and toxic circumstance in every way, shape, or form. And for those that are still in it, mad respect for those that stuck
Yep.
around, and for those that had to get out,
Yep.
respect too, because
Yes.
it was not easy at all.
Yeah. And I think we're all bearing the scars from it. I've been
Mm-hmm.
joking recently that there are two groups of people in this country: people dealing with mental health issues and people
Mm-hmm.
denying that they're dealing with mental health issues.
Yep.
We've
Oh
been
yeah.
through a thing.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the proof is in the pudding when someone tries to contact mental health care professionals. Like,
Yeah.
just to be transparent, I've been looking for mental health care myself,
Yep.
and good luck finding it.
Yeah.
Because all the good ones are overbooked right now.
Yep. It's 100% true.
Whew, man,
Yeah.
this is hitting home in more ways than one, Shonda. Did this podcast too
It is.
early.
I know. I know. But I think the one thing that's worth remembering is, and this is why, and I suspect this is true for you as well, this is why I remain involved in spiritual community no
Mm-hmm.
matter how complicated it gets,
Mm-hmm.
is we weren't wired to do this stuff by ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
especially when we're taking on issues like white supremacy, when we're
Mm-hmm.
taking on heterosexism, when we're taking on patriarchy, when we're taking on the fact that this country was founded on a class struggle and our classes are losing, because
Mm-hmm.
I know which class is winning.
Mm-hmm.
When we're dealing with things that big, when we're dealing with billionaires and what's the term, sesquibillionaires? I can't remember. There's a new
Oh.
centibillionaires. That's what they are.
Uh,
It's a whole new class of wealth, and they're busy trying to get into space instead of busy trying to help people who are
yeah.
starving. We really need each other. Um,
Mm-hmm.
at the very least, just to be reminded that that we are being gaslit, but other people see it too, right?
Yeah.
The fact that, wait, was that racism? Yeah, that really was. Wait, is it really unfair that some people are profiting off of the rest of us suffering? Yeah, that is unfair. We
Yeah.
need each other, and
Mm-hmm.
and I know that we can debate this, and I understand why people don't always feel this way. For me, um, turning to some ancient texts
Mm.
where people have gone through the same thing before, that they've been going through it for thousands of years, and they've been overcoming it and transforming it and resisting it and also screwing it up for thousands of
Mm-hmm.
years, actually is comforting to me. I love the fact that I have ancestors in the Hebrew Bible who are like, oh yeah, we know what it's like when a
Mm-hmm.
few people are making tons of money off of the fact that we are suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That's encouraging to me because they actually found ways to overcome that, to resist, to
Mm-hmm.
overthrow, to escape, to
Mm-hmm.
create new community. Um, there's something about connecting with that community as well as our current community that I think is part of how we survive this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think the scriptures are a roadmap for the resistance,
Yeah,
especially in this day and age.
yeah,
There's so many parallels in both testaments to what's
yep.
going on in America. And even though I kind of identify as agnostic now, I
Mhm,
still
mhm.
have an affinity for the scriptures because I see my story within that
Yep,
narrative.
yep.
And so could not agree with
Those
you
folks are
more
our
there.
family.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't always
Yeah.
love our family. Our family are always complicated, but they have stuff to teach us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we're over here complaining about corruption, and meanwhile
Yep.
the ancient Hebrews are like, "Oh, first time?" Like, like
Yeah.
this is we buckle up. Yeah, let's introduce you to a guy named Solomon.
Yep.
So yeah, so it's always comforting in a strange way because these struggles have been going on for far too long, but because people have walked this path, and
Yeah.
I realize that I'm part of a grand narrative that's unfolding of people that are willing to do whatever it takes to bring down the system. And yeah, and
Yes.
and those stories that of people that are leading the charge today need to be told, which is why I'm so glad you're here,
Yeah.
because you're doing wonderful work. And we know a little bit about who you are and what you're doing. And you just had some mic drop moments about grief and processing trauma. And now, just to wrap things up, tell us about what you're doing. Tell us some future works that you have that you're excited about.
So I'll say that some of the work I'm the most proud of on the ground is the work that my colleagues have been doing to get a just recovery budget passed in the city of Oakland. And there are people doing this all
Nice.
across the country, making sure that poor people, that people of color, that people who put their lives on the line, and people who are at risk of losing their homes have systems in place as our economy opens back up that honors and takes good care of them. The other thing I'm doing, and this is kind of the flip side of it, is I've been spending a lot of time making sure people know about my most recent book, which is Liberating Love Devotional. It's a
Hmm.
daily devotional with scripture for each day and then a love note from God reflecting on that scripture. But it's done from a liberationist perspective.
Nice.
It's written with the as if it's written as if the God who is sending those love notes is uh, gender nonconforming, is LGBTQ affirming,
Yeah.
is committed to the struggle for the liberation of Black lives and of immigrants and of Indigenous people. It's intended to be the devotional for the folks who want and need a word of comfort as they are fighting for justice and need to be reminded that someone's got their back in that struggle, no matter how alone they feel.
Hmm.
And it's also intended to remind us of exactly what you and I were talking about, that there are people who have gone this road before us who are ancestors who want to help support us in our own journeys of justice.
Wow, I can't wait to read that. I just got done with my history and polity class for the
Yes.
disciples. Finally, it took only 3 years longer than my coaches would have liked, but I got it done. And my favorite book that we read was Room at the Table. I thought it was
Oh,
a wonderful
yay.
book. I actually, for my final project, I mentioned this book being kind of the core curriculum that I would use if I were ever to create a new members class for disciples folks that wanted to join the
Oh,
denomination. So,
wow.
yeah, no, I recommend that too for folks that are part of our church and hear us talk about the DOC and don't really know much about it. I would
Right.
actually recommend your book above all the others. I thought it was my
Ah,
personal favorite.
I
So,
really appreciate that.
yep, yep. And I already got an A in the class, y'all. So, like, this is not me
Yay!
trying to get extra credit or anything. I genuinely love this book. So, well, Shonda, it's been a real treat. It always is. I'm hoping that you're going to make it down to Santa Cruz again and come by the brewery
I
now that we
hope
got the game
so.
room done. We could play some ping
Oh
pong
my
or some
gosh,
darts or something this
yes.
time.
Yes. I need to
Yeah.
come on one of the trivia nights or something.
Yes, now that's a good time. It's crazy packed, but it's a fun night for sure. And I'm looking forward
Absolutely.
to that. And keep fighting the good fight. Keep up the good work. Y'all, I cannot recommend checking out Shonda's books enough. Definitely do that. And let's hold tight as we process this trauma and this grief
Mm,
together. And let's reach out for
amen.
support because we all need it at times. And we got to be there and hold each other up. That's all we can do at times. Y'all, love you.
Amen.
Yeah, Shonda, thanks for coming out. Until next
Thanks
week.
so much.
Yeah, no justice, no peace. Love y'all.
And now, may the revolution of Jesus go with you wherever it may send you. May it guide you in healing this wasteland and protect you through the storm. May it lead you through this world seeking the justice it demands for you and for others. And may it bring you home preparing to continue love's mission beyond your doors. Grace and justice to you.